My name is Lisa Swinning. I am with SnapNHD, and we are super excited to be partnered with Fortress Fire to present this new wildfire disclosure report for you guys. So I brought in the experts. So Paul is going to be talking to you about this today and explaining to you what exactly this is. Okay, so thank you guys all for coming, and everyone in Zoom land, thank you guys for coming. And if you guys have any additional questions after the class, later today, tomorrow, when you think of something, just know that you can reach out to me and I can help you with any questions that you may have. Okay, all right, Paul,
Right.
Take it on.
Thank you. So Fortress Fire, we are a company that has been around now for just about 3 years. We were incorporated to bring a layer of technology to the wildfire problem to help insurance carriers better assess and manage wildfire risk. That is our purpose for being. We'll go through this a little bit. So we provide carriers tools to help them in underwriting. We provide them tools and service facilitation. So when homes don't match their insurance underwriting requirements, we help implement those mitigations. And then we help protect them over the course of the insurance period by monitoring and then delivering services. We go out at red flag warnings, we go out at the beginning of the wildfire season, and we check the house and make sure, we essentially inspect it to make sure it's in the same condition that the underwriter underwrote it. So we've spent 3 years building this tool set and platform, and about 2 years ago, we ran into the folks at CAR and started talking with them about how we could take this technology and help in the real estate industry, because in real estate, this is where the problem is most acute, because that transaction, as you guys know, obviously a new buyer has to then put in place insurance coverage. And if they can't get insurance coverage post-transaction, that's a big problem. Right now, you're in violation of your loan, and all sorts of bad things happen. So the question was, with CAR, can we start working on a set of tools to help inform agents at the transaction to understand what is going on at wildfire? And I'll give you a little background on why this has gotten to be such a big problem so quickly, but you understand it because you're living it. But the goal here was for us to bring data and analytics. We're going to use satellite imagery and machine learning and advanced physics, all to come together simply to understand the vulnerability of a structure. That is what is missing in the insurance industry today, and it's what's missing. It's what's creating such a gap between, hey, what's going on with this property? What do I need to do with this property? What does CAL FIRE think about this property? What does my insurer think about this property? All of that emanates from, we understand the fire risk in the area, but we don't understand the fire risk of this home. And so that's what we do. You'll hear me talk about vulnerability assessment. Everything we do is about understanding the risk to a structure in the event of a passing wildfire. All right, going the wrong way. All right, so purpose of the report is to help real estate professionals navigate purchase transactions with confidence, right? We are going to identify the different layers of wildfire risk. We're going to then put that in the context of the regulatory compliance for AB 38. And then we're going to put that in the context of how an insurer is going to look at this, right? And then we're going to help you understand in broad strokes the costs to meet both of those requirements, right? This is a report. This is not meant to be comprehensive. To understand the full needs, right? CAL FIRE is still going to have to come in, right? You still may have to have an inspector come out and do an insurance inspection. Better to know that upfront as you're understanding how you want to participate in this transaction, rather than understanding the way somebody else interprets this data downstream. That's the concept here. So there's applicability on both sides, both for the seller agent, but really also for the buying agent. All right, so I keep going the wrong way. So why is this a problem? At the highest level, 30% of the homes in California are in moderate to extreme wildfire areas. And what that means is that the standard insurance markets will not offer coverage generally will not offer coverage, right? So that's almost a third of the state. Wildfires are only getting worse, frequency, scope, and overall damage. So the problem is going to get worse, not better. So we have to understand what this means. Mitigation requirements are confusing and costly. CAL FIRE tells you one thing, and then you do that work, and then your insurer doesn't care, won't give you a discount, or asks you to spend more time as a homeowner to do more work, right? It's difficult to understand it's easy to understand that confusion. What we're trying to do is bring that data up so you can understand the different exclusive standards that are out there in the market. Coverage has become more expensive and more scarce. Everybody's aware of that. But at the end of the day, understanding wildfire risks to the home and the necessary steps to protect homes, that's what we're trying to level set here. If you can start the process of a real estate transaction understanding that, right, have some education and understanding of that, the process is going to go better. And that's the thesis, and that's what we're working on with CAR. So the idea here is to provide clear, detailed property data and risk assessment. We use that using our physics-based model. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that. But then in addition to understanding the risk of the property, we're also going to give you a roadmap of the actions and costs to protect the home and get it insured or lower the cost of the insurance, right? So that's the purpose. At a high level, there are any questions? I'm going to actually just step you through a couple of reports. We good? Is there anybody raising their hand online? See if I can do this. Oh, Control L, come on. All right, look at that. You can teach an old dog new tricks. All right, so this is a report. This is a report. Where is this report? We'll get the address. This is 805 Metcalf in San Jose, right? This is up in the hills somewhere. Yeah, it's southwest of the city, right? Right. So this is an aerial assessment. We can shoot around this report, I bet, afterwards, so you guys will have it if you want it. So this is what a report looks like. We don't care about the legalese. Let's take a look at this. It is a very thorough report, right? 21 pages of data and information. We don't expect you to understand all of this, but this gives you a sense of the depth and data that is provided in this report, right? We start with a summary, sort of a red light, green light at the top on the three main issues, right? Is this property subject to AB 38? You know that from the hazard report, but we will give that view. Is it compliant with AB 38? Now, we can't tell you comprehensively, but we can tell you a lot, right? And the cost of that. So we show you the quick view on AB 38. Then we show a quick view on vulnerability. And vulnerability is the component that the insurance carriers are going to start looking at. So we sort of give you red, yellow, green on those three buckets on a summary page. We then give you on page 3 here, we explain everything. Part of the feedback we'll look from you guys is, are we explaining this enough and clearly enough? This is a lot of information and it's detailed, but we try to explain every last element. Then we go through basically 3 or 4 big buckets. We give all of the property details as they pertain to wildfire. We do that with both imagery, data, and then a schematic. So you can see everything. You can see the trees, the parcel lines, the other structures, all the things that you need to be aware of when you're thinking about the risk of this property, right? So we level set on the data of the property itself. Then we get into the wildfire components. First here, we do the wildfire hazard rating. We're going to show you 3 separate hazard ratings. These are important. There's CAL FIRE, but CAL FIRE is not the end all be all. In fact, insurance carriers don't use CAL FIRE's hazard ratings in their underwriting. So we show you not only where this property sits, but its proximity to the next high fire zone, right? So even though you might have a moderate or a low here, you might only be a half a mile from a very high, right? So CAL FIRE is not going to require you to be AB 38 compliant, but insurer is going to care because we're going to show you 2 other hazard maps, right? And those other hazard maps may rate the property differently than CAL FIRE does. In fact, they very often do. So this is an important thing to just understand. There are multiple perspectives on the hazard. Understand what those might be because they'll have different implications as it pertains to AB 38 and what it pertains to on the insurance side. So we'll show you that. Then we'll show you how the property lines up against the regulatory compliance, right, on AB 38. Again, broad strokes, big picture. This isn't meant to answer every question. It's not meant to replace a CAL FIRE inspection. What it's meant to do is put the prioritization of how quickly and how important that inspection may be to you, right? Is there going to be tens of thousands of dollars of work, right? Or is it going to be less? Or do I need to know how much that is right now? But we'll do the regulatory compliance view, then we'll do the vulnerability analysis, and this is very detailed. And so once we've gone through the vulnerability, then we do a page on the costs, right? So all of this data is laid out. I'm going to step you through it here pretty quick. And a lot of times people won't use much more. Let's see if I can make this work. There you go. This you won't need to use much more than this summary page, right? But the supporting data behind the summary page is here in the next 20 pages. All right, so we start with the CAL FIRE hazard rating, right? What is it? Are you subject? Yes, no, right? In this view, we don't show you, but you'll see when we get to the hazard page, we'll show you the distance to the next hazard zone so you can understand the relative risk of the property. AB 38 compliance, right? We give you a view. This is the structure. These are the hazard zones that the insurance and the wildfire industry cares about. 5 feet is your home ignition zone. From 5 to 30 is home ignition zone 1. 30 feet to 100 feet is zone 2. These are the zones that dictate the elements of AB 38 that you need to be compliant with. And we can show you right here in this view, you've got 4 trees in zone 0, you've got four trees in zone 1 and 20 trees in zone 2. And you can see right here where those trees overlap, right? And where they're too close, right? The AB 38 requires that you trim tree canopies back. So there's 10 feet between canopies, right, Dan? It's 10 feet. Yeah. So if you look at this, you can see really closely all of these trees right here in this cluster and actually, yeah, you can see that. They're all overlapping. You're going to have to trim all of these trees back, right? You can see the trees that are in this report, this one down in the corner that's encroaching on the roof, right? That's why this is non-compliant, because there's a tree branch that's overlapping a roof line. You are going to have to trim that back. You may have to remove that tree, right? But this is what CAL FIRE is going to show you, right? Don't learn this 6 months after the transaction, right? When you've owned the home and you fell in love with it. Don't do it now. And then you figure out that you're going to have to take the oak tree in the front of the house out to be compliant, right? Like these are the things you need to understand up front. So that's your AB 38 compliance. Then here's your vulnerability. These are different flavors of the same sets of information, right? AB 38 is one lens that the state has put together. It's generally less rigorous than what an insurance carrier is going to require, right? An insurance carrier is putting up millions of their dollars, right? They're taking a couple of $1,000s in premium. If your home burns down, they're going to write you a check for a couple of $1 million. They want more precise information to protect or insure homes in high hazard areas, right? So they're going to have a more granular view, and we're going to take you through that. But this score, what you're trying to do with the score is to get it to 0. So it's 113. It's not a terrible score. If you treat 6 trees, if you retrofit all of the vents, right, you could get this score to 0, where you're going to be much more likely to get coverage if you're in a higher hazard zone, and or you're much more likely to get a discount, even if you're on the FAIR plan. The vulnerability mitigations that we lay out are in line with what the FAIR plan will give discounts for. So you take this report, you hand it to your insurance broker, and even if you have to just end up with a FAIR plan, not only can he get you a quote, but he can get you a quote on the discounts that might be applied. The FAIR plan is expensive, right? So this will be a way to get an indication of what those discounts may look like. All right, so that's your top line. 9 times out of 10, you're just going to use this, and it's going to give you the roadmap of how you should be thinking about wildfire in this transaction, depending on which side of the deal you're sitting on. Whoops, sorry. Now let's just pop through a couple of these. Yeah, here, let me show you. Sorry. It's a little tricky. So this is the report. This is the data view, the property specification view, right? Just a different angle of what you're looking at. The structures in the middle. We give you the zones. We give you the trees. We then give you, in the data that we collect, getting there, then we do what we call the schematic. It's a little bit easier to see, right? The blue line is the property line, right? So we break down the property so you understand where the parcel lines are, because you could have trees and other structures that are creating risk for you that are off parcel that you won't be able to mitigate, which means it might be even more difficult to insure. This is where the Firewise communities and some of the things that you see at community protection, you're going to hear a lot about that in the coming quarters and years. Communities protecting each other where that your neighbor needs to mitigate to the same level you mitigate because they're a threat to you. But this is the beginning of people getting to understand that. We'll walk you through that data a little bit. You can see, so here's the hazards. We give you 3 hazard scores, and I'll step you through them. This is a good example, right? So CAL FIRE's got this property rated in a high area, and it's 4.2 miles to a very high area, right? So this is, CAL FIRE sees this as a very risky property, right? And it is then subject to AB 38. And this is a state responsibility area. It's the SRA. It's not the LRA that's got jurisdiction on this. And we tell you that right here. We then look at the USDA. This is the federal government, and the U.S. Forest Service uses this, right? The federal government keeps an eye on wildfire across the country and where resources have to be allocated to keep forests clean. This is used by some insurance companies, most typically on the acceptability side. They want to be able to understand what the USDA says. And you can see here, this is a good example. This property is in a moderate zone, but look how close it is to a high zone, right? That's probably less than a mile. Dan, that is probably less than a mile, isn't it? To that orange. But so the USDA sees a little less risk here. They put the home in a moderate space, a mile or so away from high, and it's fairly distant to very high. Then you come down and you look at CPUC. Right, CPUC is the California Public Utility Commissions, right? This is what PG&E uses. This is a really important hazard view, right? They're looking at power lines and power line infrastructure and the threat they represent to the public. And so they look at this and they see elevated exposure, but not too far away. Elevated exposure, 8.5 miles to extreme risk, but really close to acceptable risk. Right, so they have this as moderate, very close to low. The USDA has it moderate, very close to high. CAL FIRE has it high, very close to very high, right? No wonder this is confusing, right? It's because it is confusing, but better to understand the way the different lenses look at this, right? It's one thing to be confused. It's another thing to not understand or not be informed. But this gives you the hazard. If we have time, I'll show you a couple other reports. Like it can fly the full gamut where CAL FIRE sees very high and the USDA says no risk. Right? What this tells you, each one of these combinations tells you something, right? In this case, you're gonna have to get AB 38 compliant for sure, right? But it might not be terribly difficult to get coverage here because it's moderate to low in some views on the hazard side, right? So getting insurance here, you're still going to want to take this report and get it going on the insurance side, even if it said it was unrated. But this probably is going to indicate a better insurance situation than something where everything is high all the way across. All right, so that's your hazard view. Now we're going to take a quick look at AB 38. AB 38 looks at compliance in those three home ignition zones, right? They recommend the home ignition zone 0 to 5. They have recommendations there and send a bright line, anything that crosses over the roof line. Then they talk about zone 1, and in zone 1 here, you see the orange trees are zone 1 trees. The yellow trees are zone 2 trees. You see this guy over here, tree 26. I don't know if you guys can discern that. This guy right here, it's a dotted line. What that means is that tree is on the neighbor's parcel. It's not on the property's parcel, right? You're not going to have control over that, right? So we show you that the blue lines show you where the parcel lines are. This is really helpful and really important. But what this says, AB 38 says you're not responsible for anything that's not on your property, right? The state is a little more lenient. A carrier is going to care about everything that is a threat to the property, regardless of where it is. So this helps begin to get those two concepts across. But you can look at this, and we sort of do red light, green light, and try to keep it really simple, right? When all of these guys look at wildfire risks, they look at the roof material, the wall material, the fuel surrounding the structure, and the home ignition zone. Those are the four big things that are always looked at. So right away, we can see this as an asphalt shingle roof. That is a Class A roof. You are compliant, right? If you don't have a Class A roof or a non-combustible roof, there's absolutely no way. It's going to be very difficult to get insurance in the state right now. Right, that's especially if you're in a hazard zone. It simply won't happen. So that's a big binary bright line. If you've got a wood shake roof still, and that property is in transaction, you need to understand the implications of that. Then we go through zone 0, zone 1, and zone 2. And this is not meant to be comprehensive. This is meant to be indicative, right? So we give you the data. We show you, hey, are there any trees that overhang the structure, right? Are there any trees that go into zone 0? How many trees are in zone 1? You've got 4 zone 1 trees. You got 20 zone 2 trees. You also have one secondary structure out here, S3, right? So there are rules about all of this stuff. What we tell you is that in the most conservative view, you're going to have to treat at least 10% of the trees in zone 1 and typically about 5% of the trees in zone 2. But you can see, and that's what our estimates are based off in this report, you can see with a naked eye that you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 trees that overlap here, 5, 6 that overlap here, 7, 8, 9 that overlap here, 10, 11, right? And then probably 12, 13. There's 13 trees that are going to need, some subset of them are going to need work. That's just on the overlapping of the canopies. What AB 38 is going to require is that they're all limbed up to at least 6 feet and that the ground clearance between them is also clear. So there's very well a bunch more work than what we're projecting, right? But we'll give you a starting point to understand where these costs will look like at the back of the report. All right, so then we go through and we show you all the other things that AB 38 is going to be looking for, and we include IBHS 2. So IBHS is the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. It is the compliance wing of the insurance industry. These are the guys who go out and determine what is a hurricane-rated roof, what are hurricane-rated windows. IBHS is setting a standard now in conjunction with CAL FIRE on what is the wildfire prepared home. This is the standard that the insurance industry is adopting. This is the standard that we've built this report to. And what we're giving you is all of the things that both AB 38 and IBHS are going to consider important. And you can see here, they aren't always the same, right? This is the reason why people get confused about, but CAL FIRE said I was good. CAL FIRE is only looking for a certain amount of stuff, right? IBHS is looking for more. IBHS is looking for more on the structure generally. They want the structure hardened and they want the home ignition zone clear. CAL FIRE wants to protect defensible space. They want to know that there's enough space that they could come in and protect that home. And yes, they are also making recommendations about the home ignition zone, but the standards are different, right? The standards and the goals are slightly different. The main objectives are all the same. Everybody here is involved about wanting to protect homes and make the businesses and property that we have safe. But there are different angles here, and that's a nuance here that is important to understand because it gets confused. So this helps gives a little bit of an understanding of what those different elements are. Then we get into vulnerability, right? And sure, can you see the question? All right. While we wait for it.
Hi, I have a question.
So this is the vulnerability view, right? So the way that the vulnerability works, the vulnerability looks at a property and we look at 5 separate threat vectors. We look at convective heat here. This is flame touch. Are there any fuels close enough to the structure that if they caught on fire, that their flames would touch the structure and cause it to ignite? Right? We look at radiant heat. This is the heat that you would get off of a heat lamp. It's the aggregate heat energy that aggregates from trees that are on fire and or other structures and puts that energy on the structure. Is there enough radiant heat to cause ignition? We look at ember entry. So as you look at these fuel sources surrounding the structure, they're throwing embers at the structure. Are there enough embers when you make some basic assumptions about venting to get into the house and burn the house from the inside out? And then ember accumulation, is there enough projection of volume of embers from these fuel sources? When they land on the roof, can they burn through the roof? If you have a Class A roof, that's very hard to do. That's why the Class A roof is there. If you've got a shake roof with a bunch of pine needles on it, it's not very hard to do, right? This is not rocket science. Anybody, it's pretty easy to understand when you put it all together. The other piece is structure to structure risk. So structures burn differently than trees. Even a big tree will hit its peak heat output and will burn in about a minute. A structure will take about 20 minutes under peak fire conditions to burn. So it's more heat, it's more energy for a longer time, right? So it's very clear about secondary structures, and whether that secondary structure is, you know, a cottage or a garage or your neighbor's house, right? Understanding where that structure is important. So what this vulnerability rating does, these are scores. Any score above 0 indicates that there's enough fuel in that particular threat vector to cause ignition, right? And so we understand the input of every single one of the trees surrounding the structure. So what we can say is, well, you've got this score of 113. If you treat 6 trees, these 6 trees marked in red, you will remove all of the threat of the convective, radiant, and ember risk that's happening. Treatment of those 6 trees will reduce the vulnerability to a point where it will be low enough that most insurers would be willing to take a look at this property. That's the idea. More importantly, if you treat those 6 trees and the vents and the other things that are being brought here, this home will be safe. This is what, as a property owner, as a community owner, you need to do to make this property safe. There's never been the ability to understand that in those simple terms. So now we've got this laid out. We spend 5 or 6 pages showing you that data. These are trees, and what would happen under our model in a peak fire scenario. Each one of these represents a wind direction. So this top corner is the wind coming from the southwest to the northeast, and you can see the curved back is the backside of the trees, and then the front flat part of those shapes is the flame length. So you can see in this scenario, these 3 trees, right, with a 20-mile-an-hour wind, if they were ignited, they would burn the house down. Any one of those 3 would cause the home to burn. In this scenario, from the east, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 trees that could cause ignition. Now, the east isn't the typical wind, right? We get hung up on this about thinking about the typical wind of where a wildfire comes from. Generally speaking, wildfires come from the east or the northeast in our standards. But when the fire gets to the structures or gets to a property, the winds go in every direction, right? There's topography changes it, the other structures change it, the trees change it. So you need to understand the scenario for the structure from all wind directions. And in fact, we also do no wind direction. So that's, you see here, we show you there are 6 unique contributing trees. Remember, there were 6 in the solution. There were 6 identified for the solution. These are the 6, right? This is very clean and simple to understand. These 6 trees need to be treated, or the house is very likely, or has a very high chance of burning down. Now we do the radiant view. The radiant view is a different set of calculations. It sees a bunch of different trees that create risk here. But you can see, while there were 6 different trees that could create all of those ignition points, there is only enough radiant heat when everything is burning for this little southwest corner to be ignited, right? And oh, by the way, this tree here was identified with the convective risk as a solved tree. So if you take this tree out of the mix, there's not enough radiant heat to cause ignition, right? So you've solved for the convective. That allows you to solve for the radiant. And the system's doing this all on the back end for you, right? But you can see here, the materials are input into the model, the windows are input, right? So we get very specific. This is Ember. Whoa. What did I do? Whoa. I did get excited. No, now I'm in math. Help. There we go. Yikes. This is what happens when you let a Mac guy get a PC. For sure. What was this? This is Ember. This is the Ember view of Ember penetration. So these are the trees, and what this is looking at is the embers being thrown at the walls of the home. And do you get enough ember, a volume of embers, and enough mass to cause the home to ignite? And it's hard to see on the screen, but on all 3 of these, the home is red and they're igniting. So this is the same concept of the wind direction blowing embers. These are the contributing trees. They're the same trees that contributed to the convective risk. It makes sense. They're close enough. They're big enough. They're throwing enough heat and embers at the walls. In this case, right, we make some assumptions here on 1/8 of an inch screens, which are the standard requirement. This is another place. The state says 1/8 of an inch screens. Well, the insurance industry is starting to look at a 1/16 of an inch screen. So CAL FIRE could say you're okay, but your carrier is going to want you to get tighter, right? Again, carriers thinking about your home burning down because their money is there to protect your money. CAL FIRE is trying to manage a state level regulation. And there's a lot of different folks who have a lot of different opinions about that. They have to be a little more cognizant of that. This is the view of the ember accumulation on the roof. Everything is blue. There's not enough embers lying on the roof to cause ignition given the materials. Very clean. What's that? Assuming a clean roof, yes. And then we look at structure to structure. So that little S3 guy up there, this home ignition zone 1 is 30 feet. That little guy is inside that 30 feet. An insurance carrier, both AB 38 and an insurance carrier are going to require you to mitigate that secondary building. So now we go through and we show you, hey, if you clear all of that risk, you still also need to clear that structure to structure risk of S3, but that's what you would do to get the score all the way down to 13. And if you did the structure, you're going to go all the way to 0. Go ahead.
Question, but when you say screen, are you talking about window screen?
Vents.
Vents.
Right.
Yeah, the wire mesh screen.
Right. Windows, we think about the window as the dual paned windows. The screen's that screen will melt pretty quickly. We'll go, so the mitigations are laid out, then we show you the trees and the elements. So now you've gone through vulnerability. Here's the cost, right? And this is probably the most consternation that people have had as we brought this report out. And the data that we've had and the feedback that we've had from CAR and from the CAR surveying that we've done is that the pricing is important and it causes a lot of concern. This is extremely conservative, right? We have done tens of thousands of these reports. We've done thousands of inspections. These are weighted averages associated with those inspections. This is only meant to be indicative, right? We're really conservative here. And we know there's a lot of other stuff at this property that will need to be investigated and handled by CAL FIRE. But the idea here is to understand a range, right? And so what we're looking at on AB3 compliance, right? There are 4 trees in zone 0 that we know are going to need to be treated. Right, there were 4 in zone 1. We're estimating 1 might need treatment, even though the image, if you know what you're looking at in the image, it's going to be closer to 6 or 7. or there's and there, and then on the 20 trees in zone 2, right, we make an estimate of 5% is usually what's happening, but you can see that there's going to be more like 6 or 7. So what you see here, and the price ranges are the range from trimming a tree on an average weighted basis to removing a tree on an average weighted basis. This is by no means meant to be comprehensive. I keep saying it. This is meant to give you a sense, right? Is it really 3,000 or is it closer to 10? Geez, I should get CAL FIRE out now, right? And I should see if there's anything else, because it could be 15 or 20, right? Oh, now let me take a look at what a carrier is going to want to see, right? Carrier is going to have a higher standard, right? They are going to require 6 right up front. I'm looking at 5 to 17 grand here. I need to get an inspection. I need to see what a carrier is going to look at. Is this insurable, right? Remember, go back to the hazard. It was fairly high hazard. It was certainly on CAL FIRE, right? I need to understand this. And then if my fair plan coverage is the only coverage and it's going to be expensive year after year, will this spend reduce the cost with the fair plan? And or is the fair plan even sufficient enough if it's a $2 or $3 million home, right? Do I need to go to the secondary markets and see what coverage is there, which may be even more expensive? So that's the idea. Again, this is data, and it's meant to provide perspective and understanding in the transaction. It's not meant to be comprehensive. This is the first view. Now you can make some decisions, right? You're not blind to what's going on with the wildfire exposure. So that's the report. What do we get? Do we have any questions online? Okay. What do we got? Fire away. The report retails for $140. What's that? Oh, yes. Sorry. The question was, what's the cost of the report? Thanks. This is $140. Buyers will generally pay for it via credit card. It is in the escrow programs for some of the distribution partners. It's not a straightforward answer. There is no standard today for insurance companies, right? IBHS is evolving. IBHS is the certification mechanism that the insurance companies have put together. So these standards are coming to market. These standards line up with the discounts that the Commissioner of Insurance has required, right? He wants structural discounts for structure hardening, home ignition zone, right? It all falls into the same line. So it's slowly coming together. I think you'll see that over the next 12 to 18 months, it'll become much more solidified. But carriers will give discounts for if you meet the IBHS standard, if you get the gold star that they have. They are required to give discounts if you get subsets of it. Different carriers will give different discounts because there's also the issue of whether they're getting an adequate rate in the first place. We don't use Google, but yes, we use commercially available satellite imagery. And so we take that imagery and we generally, it's funny, the insurance industry cared more about quality of image. They wanted to be able to see. It's what we're hearing in the real estate side is that recency matters, right? They would prefer to see a more recent image in the last month or so, as opposed to seeing a better image that they'd be able to read off of more, right? So the data is in a month or in a year? I think it'll be in the last month or 2 or 3 is I think where this will end, in the last 1 to 3 months. Most of what we're reporting on are what we call large fuel sources, heavy fuels. There isn't much change, right? We've been doing this for 3 years, right? When people clip back their trees, it's hard to see that from wherever a satellite is, right? 5 miles up or whatever. 5 miles? More than that. There you go. So the idea again, right? Like the heavy fuel sources and the structure and the relationship of those, the relationship of the parcel, the neighbor stuff, the hazard scores, that changes very little month to month, week to week.
Last question is that when you see seems to me that you do the arrow map, and then you assume that the tree is actually expanding. So I think based on the suggestion, if you don't have tree around the house, you basically clear. But my question is how does this model fit into that? See, why does it have to be? Why can it be overlap trees and why do you think the overlap trees?
Okay. So the question is, why would overlapping trees be a problem? Because then there's a couple of reasons. CAL FIRE really is focused on, hey, how do I get in there? Can I get my guys and my trucks and my equipment in to suppress that fire? That's one piece. How do I do that in a safe way? But really, they think about fire spread. And they're thinking about one tree catching on fire, right? And then the next tree catching on fire. If you get enough distance between the trees, just like if you keep the trees away from the house, if there's enough distance between the fuel sources, there won't be enough heat to ignite them. And that will prevent the fire from spreading and encroaching on the home. It's the same thing of why they want to have you limb up from 6 feet. So if there's a ground fire, if the grasses are, if the grass down below is getting spot fires because of embers from a wildfire that's a mile away, well, the grass can burn, but as long as the grass can't ignite the branches, then the tree won't burn, right? So they want you to limb up 6 feet. And even if that tree does burn because the embers landed in a dead branch, if it's trimmed back, it won't cause the next tree to burn, right? It won't be close enough, right? This is all physics. Physics is heat, volume of heat, and distance, and heat dissipates over distance. So that's why all these things are the same thing, right? If you trim back all these trees to be AB 38, you're going to be taking fuel out that reduces the overall heat that could be put on the structure, right? So these are all the same things. They just come at it slightly different at different times.
Because it's a satellite. All these trees are big trees or small trees? Do you separate them or and because there are actually a lot of small trees, but the satellite you not get looked out.
Oh no, you can. So let me. So do you see how there's different size of circles? Those are the different sizes of. Let me go back to get you a picture. There's a couple of things. Remember, so, whoa. I can't drive. All right, I'm not going to touch it. The satellite sees the tree images. We're looking at multiple bands of the image. So we pull out the shadows, we take out, I forget which band contributes to a shadow, but if you take that out, then you can see the green only, and you can see where the tree actually is. Now we're measuring the canopy, right? So the canopy of that tree, it might actually be two trees that are close together that look like one canopy from above, but we can see from that canopy, we can judge how big that tree is and how much of burnable mass, what the BTU, what the fuel load of that tree is by the size of its canopy. We don't just guess this, right? Because remember, we're going on site. The next step is that we take all of this data and we push it into an app, and an inspector, Dan's got a whole team of people who go on site with an iPad and look and actually input data of the specific trees, how tall it is, right? They validate that the canopy, is it two trees? Because two trees that are close together will burn differently than one big tree, right? So we go on site and we look and we refine what we've seen in the satellite. Then that data goes back and constantly tightens up what the machine learning does when we do these aerial assessments. So we're constantly feeding it real data that then goes and makes the model overall more accurate.
Also, it doesn't always depend on how many trees and how much vegetation is in the house. That's the location of the house. What it is in fire district, whatever, you may still be required to have California Fair Plan.
Oh, of course. Well, it's not a matter of you being required to have fair plan.
Yes,
The fair plan might be the only thing that you can get.
yeah, most carriers, I'm an insurance writer. So most carriers will not.
Yeah.
Cover it unless you have California Fair.
Oh, sorry.
And we had an online question about, is it the seller's responsibility to remove the trees?
Well, no, it's never the seller's responsibility. AB 38 doesn't require that the seller comply. The AB 38 only requires that the seller disclose whether or not the property is in a hazard zone. The buyer is required to comply with AB 38 within a year of the transaction, I believe. But again, if you're taking on that liability, better to know is it small or medium or large.
So would this report be considered the disclosure for an AB 38?
No, the only way that you get AB 38 compliance determined is by CAL FIRE. This is to help you understand, right? This is to help you understand what you might be, right? How important it is to understand what those costs are. Right? This gives you a bird's eye view.
Or the local fire department, whoever has jurisdiction.
Yes, yes. What else we got?
We have an online question. How does timber protection affect fire insurance? Do you still need fire insurance if there are no structures on the property?
Fire insurance is generally a requirement of your mortgage, right? Your mortgage will require you to have fire insurance. And if you don't have fire insurance, generally speaking, your mortgage will charge you for insurance themselves. And that insurance will be to protect their loan, not to protect your home. So generally speaking, the requirement for insurance is of your mortgage lender. We haven't gotten to a place in the state yet where you can't get coverage, right? That's what the FAIR Plan is here for.
Someone else was asking, what is your contact information or who to refer questions to?
Go ahead. We're here. We're here.
Yes. I will put my contact information in the chat for you guys. This is Lisa Swinning with SnapNHD. I will put that information in the chat. You can contact me with any questions or needs. Also, just so you guys know, if you have a client that is interested in ordering this report, you can do that on SnapNHD's website. So we are one of the partners that Fortress has, where we have that capability on our website for you to go to and place that order. And it can be paid with a credit card on our website or through escrow. So just wanted to let you guys know about that as well. And one more thing, kind of going back to one of the questions that were asked a few minutes ago, there are only two places where it is required for the seller to actually do the things to the property before the sale of the property. And that is in Truckee and in Paradise. They have local ordinances there that state that these things must be done to the property before the property sells. Other than that, right now, there aren't any local ordinances as far as these things needing to be done to sell the property. Okay.
And also in Maui, I noticed that the house that has a blue roof did not burn. Do you have information on what type of roof that is?
Yes, the Maui house that referred to as the Miracle House, that house didn't burn. It was not by accident at all. That house had been recently built. They didn't intend to build it the way they did to be a fire safe house, but they had standard compliant vents. They had a non-combustible roof. They didn't have any vegetation in the home ignition zone, and they didn't have any structures close enough to them that when they caught on fire, that they represented a threat. It is not by accident that home did not burn. That was a wildfire prepared home. Now, things can still happen in a fire, right? A 60-mile-an-hour wind, an 80-mile-an-hour wind, a branch falls off of a tree and goes through a window, and now all of a sudden embers can get in through that window, right? It's not a guarantee that you won't burn, but it's certainly not a surprise that that house didn't burn. That home would have scored very close to a 0 on our vulnerability, and that's what happens, right? These are basic physics terms, right? This is all knowable. Our physicist and our team looks at us when we say these things, and he kind of laughs at us because he's like, we've known for 150 years that this home wouldn't burn, right? The math and the computation's there. So what's that? That was a metal roof. Yeah. Steel roof. Right. So tile is non-combustible, but tiles have cracks and bird stop gaps, right? Tiles have gaps on them. So while the material is non-combustible, you need to see the condition of the roof. Same thing with the asphalt shingles, which I can't seem to say, right? That material is non-combustible, but it tends to hold on to pine needles and stuff. It's got to be clean, because if embers laying in pine needles, the pine needles burn, right? That heat could be enough to burn through or create a crack or burn the sealant between the shingles. The metal roofs are some of the best, right? They don't have cracks and mat, right? They're typically more modern, but all of those are, and then there's composite too. There's other composites. The big issue is shake shingles, right? That's the big issue.
So what was your
My background is more on technology enabled services. So we didn't talk about it here today, but like all of what this report does is it identifies all the services. My background's in, okay, how do you now get all of these things taken care of and get that information certified so that a carrier can feel good about it? That's where my career has been. But Dan ran the National Guard here in the state of California, all the wildfire work that was going on back in 1718. He had people all over the state doing mitigation work. So we've got service expertise. We've got a partner and an investor that built a retardant that the U.S. Forest Service drops. They were the ones, they were a part of the original model that built this. And so the way that we are doing the vulnerability study, and then we've got a whole tech team as well. And the tech team has physicists, it has guys who write code, and then we have an insurance team. So the company is insurers, technologists, fire ground guys, fire management guys. You're welcome. Go ahead.
Hi. Is this the same fire retardant that has been lately known to cause cancer in firemen and anyone who is?
No, that's our, that's better.
Yes, no,
Come on, seriously?
no. Yes, with this retardant just came on the market this year. It's a salt based, right? It's very similar what they spray in composite and concept to what they spray for on planes, de-icing. It's what in the other states, right? We drop salt. I grew up in Massachusetts, salt in New York, you drop it on roads, right? It's very similar in approach to that. All right, it's been an hour. That was probably more wildfire than you ever wanted to know. Thank you for coming in this morning. Thank you for giving us the chance to talk about it, what we're trying to do. Any feedback, this is really important. Any feedback is helpful to us, right? There's a big problem in the state. We got a lot of people working on it. It's not just us, but the car distribution partners, these guys who are putting these meetings together and gathering this feedback, help. We need your help, right? And we're here. We will listen to you, and we'll build it into the whole program. So thank you.